The search for the fountain of youth is a long time process that's been going on for centuries. In fact, the word macrobiotic means longevity. It means the way of longevity, and it was coined by Hippocrates, the father of Western medicine, to describe people who are long-lived and healthy by following the laws of nature. It turns out that that idea of seeking longevity, or the fountain of youth, goes all throughout many cultures. Ponce de Leon searched for that in Florida, and instead he found swamps and alligators and disease. But he was trying anyway, from the Spanish explorer. And in Ayurveda, for instance, means the science of long life. So what they were doing was seeking how to extend life. In Taoism, Chinese medicine came from a philosophy called Taoism. And in that philosophy, they have something called Yang Shen Dao. Yang Shen Dao means the way of long life. And they were seeking to do that. And the purpose of those in those traditions, they had some spiritual approach that they wanted to live a long life in order to develop themselves fully. So they didn't have to come back to this life. They believed in reincarnation. You keep coming back until you finish the job of evolution. And so the idea of living a long time was not to party hardy, long and hardy, to party forever. It was basically to extend. So whether or not, whatever our purpose of longevity, we basically, seek longevity. Or in China, they had an interesting experience with this in their medicine. They said, it's hard to avoid aging completely, if not impossible, but we can have graceful aging, where our body ages gracefully. And in our youth-oriented culture, of course, we have a lot of misunderstandings about aging. Of course, as you get older, you start to understand their misunderstandings because we tend to value youth. And in fact, there's an interesting thing in Oriental medicine. They say if someone doesn't live their life, in where they're at the time, their age, like someone who's younger acts like they have the age of experience, or someone who's older is trying to act like a teenager, they say this is a certain imbalance in the body of the organs. That's very interesting. So they saw that the energy of that body is not settled. That's what they say. It's not settled into where they're at. So the process of aging is interesting because according to nature, it appears that nature doesn't care if we age. You know what nature cares about? That we reproduce. So if you reproduce and then you drop, nature is very happy. You get an applause from nature. Well, not necessarily an applause, but because basically it wants the species to continue. But we care about aging, and so they're studying aging. We have like life extension and the study of aging and study of longevity. It's going on from a scientific process. And from a scientific view, there's many different theories of aging. For instance, there's the telomere theory of aging, where the strands at the end of the DNA of our cells shorten. And as they start to shorten, basically the cells age, and then the whole body ages. That's one theory. So they have different kinds of things that they say you can take to stop the telomeres from shortening, so you can stay youthful. Then there's the free radical theory of aging. Free radicals, not a group from the 60s, but free radicals are cells that become damaged and they lose electrons. And they go to other cells and they steal the electrons. And in the process of stealing the electrons, they age the cells. And this theory of free radical theory is also, aging is also related to cancer and heart disease, because in traditional cultures, cancer and heart disease were diseases of aging. They weren't something that people got when they were young. We have more damage that people are born with, so basically we get cancers at a younger age today too. And then we have the stress model of aging. And the stress model is that our body, if the body is exposed to stress, it goes through various processes. So one of the processes it does when you're exposed to stress is, of course, you start to rev up your energy. And that's when the small 130-pound women can lift up a car to save their child, because basically there's so much stress hormones running through the body that basically it gets super strength. In science fiction, they say, they try to give all the kinds of things to get super strength for that to happen. And what happens there in the process then of that is that you can't really do that according to the science fiction model, because the body goes into a next phase when it is basically under stress. So the first stage of stress is the body puts out a lot of energy. Second stage of stress is the body adapts to that energy by cutting off the energy in the body to different organs to save energy. So then you start to have all kinds of functional problems. That's when you have like digestive problems, or someone might have reproductive problems if they're younger. People may start to have some circulation problems or mental problems. And then the third stage of basically the process of aging is the body starts to dramatically cut down energy to organs, and you start to have degenerative diseases. That's when the immune system doesn't function for many years, and then basically cancer arises. Or the immune system is also responsible for keeping you healthy with heart disease. So obviously, that then the fourth stage of stress, of course, is that the body can't handle the stress so much that it shuts off, it dies. The energy of the body stops completely. And that can happen in the first stage too. When you're exposed to a tremendous amount of stress, the body may not be able to heal it. So that's when someone goes in for what seems to be a minor surgery, but then the body can't handle the stress and the person dies in the minor surgery. The heart stops. So sometimes in the first stage. So my sense is that there's something true about all these theories of aging, but I think the stress model makes the most sense because it actually includes the other models. So when the body is under certain kinds of stress, a lot of free radical damage occurs. The telomeres shorten. So I think to help the fountain of youth, or to stay youthful and healthy, which means to avoid the diseases of aging or premature aging, then we want to really address the stress model. Now, so there are various kinds of stresses that we're exposed to, and we'll talk about how to deal with those stresses, but let me talk about the traditional Oriental medical understanding of stress. Now, in this modern model of stress that came from some researchers, you only have a certain amount of energy that your body has. And this is similar to what they understood in traditional Oriental cultures, that we're born with a certain amount of chi. In Wisconsin, they say you're born with a certain amount of cheese. No, I'm kidding. But you're born with a certain amount of chi. Chi is life force. And this is your constitutional energy, what we know as genetics, your genetic strength. And basically then, that genetic strength is kind of like a wire or spiral that's wound up tightly. And if you unwind that wire, that bound up wire very slowly, then it slows down the aging process. But if you unwire it, you unravel it very, very quickly, then it causes stress and damage. And then if you unwire it completely, your energy will lose completely. You lose energy. So when you want to have a certain amount of energy, so the key is to preserving your energy. Now, another longevity or macrobiotic model in Oriental medicine was this idea that, to explain this, is the idea of a candle analogy. And the candle analogy is that basically our body is like a candle. We have the wax and wick of the candle, which is like the substance of your body, which is considered the most concentrated source of energy. In Oriental medicine in China, they call it the qi, or in India, they call it the prana, the most concentrated form of energy. And then we have basically the heat coming off the candle in our body. That is the energy rushing through the body, using up for all the functions of the body. And then we have the third part of the candle is the light. And the light of the candle in our human body is the light of the mind, so of consciousness, the mind or consciousness. So they call these the three treasures. And in the longevity understanding, they said you're born with three treasures. If you can preserve these treasures, you have good health and longevity. You have the wealth of longevity and good health. But if you squander these treasures, you have the poverty of sickness and a short life. So, of course, then many things were taught about how to preserve this. So, for instance, we can understand to preserve the body, we have to first make sure that the body is made of the right kind of substances, food. So food is very important, the right kind of food. And today there's a lot of confusion about what to eat. Some people say no carb, gluten brain, wheat belly. So we have all these ideas. Just avoid all those foods that our ancestors ate for thousands of years, and you'll be fine. That's basically the wheat idea. We should avoid wheat, something our ancestors. We're here because of wheat. Most of us, if we're European background, we're here because of wheat, because they all ate wheat. So there's all these funny ideas. People say we should eat all raw. So that all raw is something that nobody really ever did. So there must be a reason that nobody ate all raw. So other people will say we should eat only vegetarian or vegan, which again nobody ever did around the world. So you often wonder, why. I mean, we could choose to do that. I have a recent article I wrote called "How to Be Safe on a Vegan Diet," but I think it's important to understand that it's not natural in the sense that nobody really did it. There's a reason why nobody did it. There's certain nutrients in the animal food, and if you choose to do that, my article is very good on the website, my website. I have also, I'll pass these around for people who didn't get them. These are flyers of things, activities I'm doing, and gives you the information. If you want to go to the website, you'll see a lot of good information on there. Maybe we can pass them through the couch when it comes to you, because we don't make it easier to do that. And so basically, there's a lot of confusion about food and what food will make healthy longevity. But fortunately, there is a lot of evidence of longevity cultures of what they ate. And what they ate also corresponds to what our body needs energetically and what body needs also nutritionally. So we'll talk about that because that'll be a key to longevity. And then basically, then we have the energy rushing through our bodies, the energy we use up doing things. So for instance, if you don't get enough sleep, your body has to use a tremendous amount of energy to deal with it. So sleep is really important. If you don't exercise at all, your body becomes stagnant. As we get older, the body becomes stiff. So they studied longevity a lot in China, and there's a lot of wealth of wisdom, although we can't do exactly what they did. But there's a lot of wealth of wisdom, and one of the things from the exercise system there, called Qigong, that they said was that the rusty hinge causes disease. The moving hinge doesn't rust. So the rust means the body doesn't get sick. So that they developed all these exercises that are really simple, just stretching and moving, because as we get past a certain age, it's really easy to get stiff. But I also notice that sometimes I see the stiffness at a young age because people are sitting more and they're not moving and they're staying in cars. And when I walk through the airport, I look at young bodies and old bodies, and a lot of the old bodies look stiff, but the young bodies start to look stiff, which is kind of alarming because that means the energy and blood's not moving well at a young age. It's starting to happen. And so we're not as active as we're at the video games and the computers and other things, from a young age. So the body starts to get stiff and stagnant. At the same time, if you overdo exercise, you can exhaust the body. Athletes are not known for their longevity. They're known for amazing feats, but not necessarily for longevity unless they're really careful because they push their body often too much. And then also with our day-to-day, so what we're exposed to will use up energy. We're exposed to toxins, we use up a lot of energy. We're exposed to toxic people. No, nobody's boss in particular, but or coworkers. Then we have to use up a lot of energy. Then we have basically the mind, which also can be a form of stress. So some people say this is the biggest and baddest form of stress because we could get stressed by thinking about something. And so there is ways to also, just like there's ways to make the energy of the body more smooth and to do certain things to stop the body from using up energy and stress, there's also ways to also cause the mind to become less stressful. So again, going through Eastern teachings from the Buddhist and Taoist tradition, they said that in order to be healthy, you need also a healthy mental attitude. Now, when we say healthy mental attitude, often we think positivity, optimism, but they had a different definition of healthy mental attitude. Their healthy mental attitude is that every observed phenomena, every mental thing that goes on becomes empty. It actually becomes empty and derived from emptiness and goes back to emptiness. And also part of the healthy mental attitude is we realize, particularly as we're older, if we realize when we're younger, it's even better, that nothing that happens to us touches our consciousness. We still survive, our consciousness still survives and doesn't get touched by events or thoughts. So the solution often was meditation type techniques. And the meditation techniques is basically, they have a calming effect, but they really are designed to promote a healthy mental attitude that you can let go of your thoughts and not take yourself too seriously. Many times we take our thoughts very seriously, and that's why we argue with other people about them, because this is really serious and I'm right. Or another way of saying it, we're all the stars in our own movie. Everybody else is a bit player. So meditation can be a technique as long as you don't take meditation too seriously too. There are people who want to keep in a meditation state all the time, and that's not natural either. We're supposed to experience life and have emotions and have thoughts. But meditation can be the process and meditation techniques where we can let go of them. And if we let go of them, then they don't cause mental stress for us. For instance, there are people who teach, some modern teachings about this, and they say, the past doesn't exist. It's only a thought now. But for many people, they take the past really seriously, and they think about it a lot, and they get upset about it a lot. But it's only happening now. So we have a choice whether or not we're going to get upset about that and make a big thing of the past or not. It doesn't mean that those things that happened bad didn't happen. You can't change that. Doesn't mean that people were not doing mean things or bad things or irresponsible things. But it just means that it's not here. It doesn't exist. The future also doesn't exist. It doesn't mean that we can't think about it. But if we think about the past too much and if we think about the future too much, we can really use a lot of energy. And that's why meditation technique is sometimes used for healing, because we use up so much energy with our thought. I've always been fond of meditation techniques. At the same time, when I learned about food and lifestyle 40 years ago, I learned about meditation techniques. And I always really liked them because I found that the more I did them, the more it just gave me the process of letting things pass through. So I would experience something, some emotion, even if it was upsetting or good, and it was great, and then just let it pass through. And then I'm ready for the next thing to happen. So I basically found that it helped me to let go of my thoughts. At the same time, it's an interesting thing because when you're living your life, you're absolutely serious about it. When you're playing the game of life, to play the game well, when you're playing a game, you have to be really involved. At the same time, then, if you have the ability to let go, it saves a lot of stress. So I encourage people to learn, some about meditation techniques or some of those philosophies that help us to understand to let go. And you can't really get rid of the ego because, the ego is part of us, the personal I, but we can basically get to the point where we don't take it so seriously all the time, or we can let it go. And now the interesting thing about that is that also is a physical thing that happens. If the body is tight and blocked, it's very easy to feel stuck in this body with your mind. So this is something that was understood that I absolutely found to be true over the years of counseling many, many people and doing practices myself. So let's talk about each one of those. Diet stress is the mother of all stresses because we often will basically deprive ourselves. So when we go on diets, one of my CDs I made recently at a lecture was on weight loss truths and myths. And what I found was that basically dieting is the worst way to lose weight. Actually, to put it another way, dieting is the best way to gain weight. And if people can manage to calorie restrict themselves, then they develop a semi or even a full-blown eating disorder when you starve yourself and stop yourself from eating. So this place, chronic calorie deprivation, whether it be from healthy eating or from consciously dieting, is the mother of all stresses because when you're in starvation mode, your body uses up a lot of energy. So this is one of the things that they found that, there's all these theories about it that if you calorie deprive, you'll live longer. It might be that old joke, are you living longer? Does it seem longer? But what they found is that really didn't work it only works in animals when the animals are very young. And what happens when you starve an animal when it's young, it doesn't grow. So it doesn't grow, it doesn't need many calories. But when they start the animal when it's older, like they'll have like alpha male apes turn into like pansy apes, lose all their aggressiveness, all their joy of life, all their vigor, because they're basically calorie starved. So there is no sense that, when they do with animals, when they start them in the middle of their age or when they're grown, they find that they get sick earlier, they die earlier. So calorie deprivation only puts the body in a starvation mode. So in the bigger picture, the number one nutrient is calories. And there's some research that shows that women need at least 2,300 calories a day, and men need at least 2,500 calories a day, and possibly more. Women may need more after the age of 25. Before 25, women and men need more calories. And this is a disturbing trend because now a lot of young women and some men are on diets, keeping their calories low. So basically, the calorie deprivation, restricting the foods, any category of food also puts you in a starvation mode, putting you in stress. So if you restrict protein, like vegan diets, vegetarian diets, vegan diets particularly are very restrictive in protein because grains and vegetables and beans have very low amounts of protein. Grains and beans have the highest amount of protein, but it's 10 to 15%. So this becomes a very low-calorie diet. In my article on how to stay safe on a vegan diet, I encourage people to take protein powders to keep their protein up, along with eating adequate calories from carbohydrates. Because if you don't, carbohydrates calories are protein-sparing. That means you use all the protein as calories because basically our body needs carbohydrates. But if you have a low carbohydrate diet, high protein, the body uses the protein for energy and not building structures, cells, brain chemicals, immune cells. It causes a lot of problems. So, restricting any part of the diet also. And then gorging on food that you don't tolerate, like binging on, processed foods and chemicalized foods also causes body stress. So this is something that modern eaters do often. They gorge on foods, and often they gorge on foods. Sometimes it's from restrictive or not eating a balanced diet. So the person skips breakfast, they skip lunch, and then dinner is really, the broccoli looks good when they're starving, right? That's a joke. I don't know if it translates well in film, but basically it's a sarcastic joke. I apologize for my sarcasm, but it's what happens is we know that if you're starving yourself all day, you don't want to binge on broccoli. What do you binge on? It's not broccoli, right? Not brown rice, not broccoli. Or you really want that tofu? No, you don't want that. What do you binge on? Sugar, something sugary, a burger, a greasy burger with, cheese, fries, pizza, ice cream. It has to be something very rich. And, many of the commercial foods basically have a lot of poor ingredients that cause a lot of problems, and people can't tolerate them, but, their balance has to be made. So much more reasonable is to eat a reasonable amount of healthy food, so then you don't binge on unhealthy foods that your body can't tolerate. So basically, for longevity, people need what I call a full-spectrum macrobiotic diet, or macrobiotic way of eating. In a lot of the books that are called macrobiotic, it's mostly one kind of diet, which I call the fasting cleansing diet. It's a diet that's low in protein, low in fat, low in nutrients. For people who ate a lot of meat, a lot of poor quality meat and dairy food, and a lot of poor quality greasy food, and they didn't eat enough vegetables, and they got a lot of congestion. And eating a diet that's very low in fat and protein, for some people, certain kinds of conditions can help. But I've seen people on the same diet get sick later, because the truly full spectrum diet included a variety of natural, animal, and vegetable foods. In the big picture, animal food has certain things vegetable foods absolutely doesn't have. And at the same time, vegetable foods has something that absolutely animal food doesn't have. So they're a complementary balance. So it's not, so we might call it the and diet. Today we promote diets that are either or. Either it's high protein, low carb, or it's high carb, low protein, either or. But hey, how about and? The and diet. So basically, a simple way of understanding this is that we need, if you look at the healthy cultures around the world, including the the people in Switzerland that was studied by a researcher, Weston Price, in his book Nutrition and Physical Degeneration, in the Lochenthal Valley, the Swiss, the Gaelics in the Isles of Lewis, the Eskimos of the Lower Kuskokwim, the Maasai, the Quichua Peruvians, the Sardinians, the Nicoyans, the Okinawans, and the Icarans. These are people who are known for their good health or longevity that have been studied. They ate a certain way to promote longevity, and there's some evidence that research today supports that. So, for instance, they ate basically, the people there ate energy-producing foods. All of them had energy-producing foods. Primarily, the majority of these longevity groups ate carbohydrates as their main energy sources. The carbohydrates came from starches mostly. That's grains, whether it be rice or millet or barley or wheat in the form of breads or pastas. They also ate some ate tubers in the form of potatoes or sweet potatoes. People lived in very hot climates, or people lived high in the mountains often ate tubers, like the Peruvians ate a lot of tubers. The Peruvians were so strong that they could carry a 50-pound backpack in the mountains of Peru for 5 hours, 50-pound pack of something, without getting winded. Now, of course, they were bred to do that for many generations, but they were quite strong on their diet. And so everyone around the world, except for very cold places like the Eskimos, ate as their main energy source some kind of grains, starches, tubers, and then supplemented with fruits and natural sweeteners. So as the name sugar. Then also an additional source of energy in those places was fat. So the fats that people ate were mostly saturated or monounsaturated. Those were the main fats. So saturated was things like butter, coconut oil. Unsaturated fats were things like sesame oil, olive oil, peanut oil. Those are the main fats that were used. Newfangled fats are like canola. Canola, anyone know what canola is derived from? The word canola? Canadian oil. Canadian oil, la. I don't know if the la came from. Maybe Canadian oil didn't sound so good. So canola sounded better because it was genetically modified seed that was used. Safflower oil didn't exist because all safflower oil has to be made with solvents, chemical solvents, and special machines. Sunflower oil didn't exist. And these fats have a kind of fat that create inflammation in them when you overeat them, these polyunsaturated fats. So they're not great sources of oil. So fat is, most people need at least a few tablespoons of fats a day, and some people who need more calories need more to supplement their diet as an energy source. Fat tends to be a slow-moving, burning energy source, while carbohydrates are fast-burning. We need more fast burning than slow burning. And so it's important to eat enough calories from these energy producing foods because the most important reason we eat is for energy. Then the second thing that's important is we need to eat more natural foods without preservatives, without chemicals, without additives, so more natural foods. And so today, we eat a lot of, it doesn't mean that you can never eat at a restaurant. But if you eat at a restaurant every day, you're going to get a lot of chemicals and additives. And if you eat natural animal food, then basically it's hormone-free, pesticide-free. If you eat commercial meat, very high in pesticides. And that's probably the most damaging effect of that it has a different kind of fat in it, very high in pesticides. So we need to eat natural foods as people did around the world. Chemicals and pesticides are newfangled things that we don't necessarily need as much as we can. And then also, for people who need to get some commercial produce, you can look at something called the Dirty Dozen and the Clean 15. Dirty Dozen are the commercial produce products, vegetables and fruits that have the most pesticides. And the Clean 15 is the ones that have the least. So if you need to get some commercial ones, get those. Those are the least. Then also, we need to also balance animal and vegetable foods. So some people, will have a choice of being vegan, and if there's only certain things in animal food that doesn't exist in any vegetarian or vegan foods. For instance, there's very low zinc in vegetable foods. very low iron in vegetable foods, very low amounts of protein in vegetable foods, and not all the amino acids. So we have zinc, iron, protein, very low amounts of calcium in vegetable foods. In order to get enough calcium from greens, you'd have to eat 2 pounds a day. Not very practical. And then you'd have a problem because greens are very high in a thyroid-lowering agent called goitrogens. So then you'd have a problem from that. So greens basically, without either taking bone broths or dairy products, you can't get calcium. So bone broths and dairy products were the two sources of calcium in traditional cultures. So they didn't get it from vegetable sources. Also, B12 is only in animal food. B12 is only in animal food. And B vitamins are not as available or as concentrated in vegetable food. It's more in animal foods. So we have zinc, we have iron, we have certain amino acids, we have basically the certain kinds of fats. Cholesterol is only in animal food, which is an important nutrient too, in addition. We talked about these various nutrients, B vitamins. So that if someone wishes, for a person who is more open to it, it's best to have some natural animal foods like meat or fish or natural dairy products if you tolerate them in your diet on a regular daily basis to give you those things that are not in the vegetable foods. And at the same time, there's the major thing that's in vegetable foods that are not in animal foods is carbohydrates. And the body absolutely needs carbohydrates. There are now hundreds of stories and lists on the internet of people who went on low-carb diets and they get sick after the initial period of 6 months or a year because the body is missing carbohydrates. They add in grains or starches or even fruits or tubers and they feel much better. So carbohydrates are a very important form in there, and certain nutrients also, like the phytochemicals, which are protective against cancer and diseases, are only in vegetable foods. So there's a balance. Now, in the bigger picture, we need much more vegetable foods than we do need animal food. So by bulk-wise, so portions of animal food might be 4 ounces, 6 ounces for people who are very, very depleted. People who become very depleted from not eating animal foods in their diet often need a little more after they tolerate them to build up their body. And once they build up their body, then the amount is variable. But most people feel better on a daily basis, and people start to find their level. We need to balance whole food and processed foods. Now, processed foods have gotten a bad rap. People say everything should be whole. But there is a purpose to having organic white flour, having also organic white rice, and that purpose is calories. You can raise your calories. On a whole food diet, it's very hard to get enough calories, so if someone's athletic, they have to actually eat quite a bit of white rice, some white flour products, and some natural sugars to get up their calories. Otherwise, they won't get enough from just whole foods because there's so much fiber in the grains. So we need to balance whole foods and processed foods, eating quite a bit of good whole foods in their whole form. And then we also need to eat in harmony with the season, but we don't have to do that completely because we're not living outside. For instance, I'm not giving this lecture outside. So if I was giving this lecture outside, then we might have to pass around something very warming for you even if we had a campfire out in the parking lot there. I don't know if they would go for that. It would be a very natural lecture, though, because we'd be very close to nature. Well, it's as close as you can get in a parking lot on a highway. But basically, we have central heating and we have central air. But still, if you break that rule, people don't feel well. For instance, if people eat a large amount of salad in the winter and a lot of tropical fruit in the winter, they don't quite feel as well. Even though they're in central heating, they don't feel as well. And if someone eats, lots of overcooked, barbecued meat and well-cooked food in the summer and never touches vegetables or salad or fruit, they don't quite feel good in the summer, even though we have air conditioning. And the funny thing is that I remember I was teaching years ago in Singapore, and one of the people where I was staying, the woman had help in her house from women from Malaysia. And she was English, and her husband was English. And she told me a funny story that when she first moved to Singapore is 1 degree north of the equator. So it gets pretty hot there for a long time, warm, continually warm. And they didn't have air conditioning. So she had a hard time with the heat. And so at her home, they didn't have air conditioning. Her husband went to the office for work, which had air conditioning, but she stayed home and did things out of her house. She did, cooking classes and some other things. And she told her that her Malaysian help told her how to eat to stay cool, to pick certain plants and certain veg fruits and certain ones that would cool you off. And when her husband ever came home, he had a really horrible time in the heat because he always wanted to keep eating English style, which is the traditional English style is quite heavy, with heavy meats and well-cooked vegetables, and he wouldn't adapt. So he had a hard time adapting. So we need to adapt to the season. We need to adapt to the climate. So if you live in, a lot of people who moved from India will keep eating their Indian food, and the Indian food and the Indian diet is designed to keep you cool in a hot climate with a lot of hot spices and certain kinds of tropical fruits. But then when you try to eat that here, you don't feel as well. Better than junk food, because they stay healthier, but a lot of them will get sick because they are not in harmony with the climate and they get weaker. So we can eat those foods we came from for sentimental reasons, but we have to be careful. Now, in addition, we need to understand the energetics of food, how food affects us overall. Certain food builds us up, certain foods relaxes us. In lifestyle, we have to respect, like, for instance, regularity in lifestyle and, getting enough sleep are two things that de-stress you. Whenever your lifestyle becomes irregular, you have to use up a lot of energy. Like, for instance, I've come to Chicago almost 20 years, and I used to come to the place next door, the hotel next door. So I'm coming to the same area for 20 years. So there's a routine I have in Chicago, so it's actually very easy to come to Chicago. I know which places to eat good food out. I know how to drive from the airport. I know how to go to the airport. And recent times I was leaving from a different airport, and the first time I had to use a lot of energy leaving from the airport. Second time I didn't have to use as much energy because I kind of knew the routine. This is how you drive, this is where you go, this is where I'm going. So your body adapts to regularity. A lot of people have irregular lifestyles, and this really uses up a lot of energy. That doesn't mean we have a boring lifestyle. never doing things spontaneous. We have to do that too, a little zest in life. But we need to have a regular lifestyle. There are certain kinds of energy exercises that de-stress people and get people out of the stress mode. So these can be very useful for the body. And so in China, they call these exercises Qigong. And if you want to see an example of Qigong, go to my YouTube channel, Kozinski Macrobiotics, and look under 8 brocades, the class for the 8 brocades. The 8 brocades is a very famous Qigong set. And it's both strengthening to the tendons. In China, they had an interesting view in their martial arts and exercise. They believe that power really came from the tendons. So if you want to get power, martial artists will train their tendons. So then a martial artist at 80 will still have incredible power, but not much muscle left. But still they'll have enough power to really feel their energy because the tendon strength is still very powerful. So these exercises, the brocade, have strengthening effects and calming effects at the same time. It's an easy set to learn, and I teach them also when I come and I travel to different places. I'll teach Qigong lessons. But that can be very useful. Now, for the mind, as I said, the main technique is to understand the mind, first of all. So there's some modern views of understanding the mind. There's a man who wrote a book called The Inside-Outside Revolution, Michael Neal, which has some interesting modern take on understanding the mind, similar to traditional Eastern views. Some of the books on Taoism, translated by Ken Cleary, also can give you the Eastern take on it to understand the same kind of view, but Michael's is more contemporary and the other one is more traditional. So that can help the mind. Now, in addition to these things, there are 2 other things that can help our longevity. One of them is supplements. So supplements are needed for a lot of different reasons. Purist and conservative doctors will say don't use supplements. We don't need any extra nutrients. Vitamin supplements basically are wasted energy, the famous anti-supplement doctor, Dr. Jarvis, said it's expensive urine. Supplements are expensive urine. But the myth, basically, there's a myth of a balanced diet. the myth of a balanced diet is that it doesn't take into account our personal, our ecological considerations, our genetics, our environment, our agriculture, our stress, and our health history. So basically, under stress, you use up a tremendous amount of nutrients, particularly vitamin C and B vitamins. And if you don't replace those, you cannot replace those B vitamins with food enough because you use up so much of them. Same with vitamin C. You can't replace them. If you have an infection in your body, and there are many people who have infections they don't know about, some people have ones that they know about, like gum disease. Under infection, your body produces immune cells and uses up 7 grams of vitamin C in a day. You can't get 7 grams from oranges or any natural food. You have to actually take it in a supplement. And basically, so there are actually research in one of the first doctors, there was a doctor in the 50s who discovered this, that people have, he coined a term, biochemical individuality. It's been found, like for instance, people who have schizophrenia have been found they have very high needs for niacin. And some people who have schizophrenia, if they take extremely high doses of niacin, it controls their schizophrenia. Better than drugs, or sometimes they take it with drugs and they could take less of the drugs. The new schizophrenia drugs have less side effects than the old ones, but still, if you can reduce that, they still have side effects. So there are some people who are born with that. Dr. Hoffer, Abraham Hoffer, was a pioneer in psychiatry and vitamins and nutrients, and he found that when people went through trauma, like people who were in a concentration camp and were starving for several years, they became, like many of them, became niacin dependent after their time of starvation. And if they didn't get higher doses of niacin, they couldn't function. You know, George Carlin the comedian has a funny routine about this, about the different ways we talked about exposure to stress and war. So I think it was World War I, it was called battle shock. World War II, it was called, actually some battle fatigue. And now we have PTSD, you know. So it become more critical, like, you know, shell shock was the first one. So shell shock is actually pretty graphic. You know what it is, and battle fatigue, hey, you know. But, you know, post-traumatic stress disorder is pretty clinically dry. Doesn't really tell you anything, like, you know. George Carlin, of course, is a little colorful. He told it in a very strong way of what it meant right, for people. But what happens under stress is somehow people become niacin dependent. Stress from the battle fatigue or stress from starvation. So basically, each of us do have nutritional requirements that are different, so that my sense is that everybody today needs supplements for longevity. If the person who doesn't need supplements, then I have a way of diagnosing, a form of diagnosis I call East-West diagnosis from studying Oriental medicine and modern understanding of the body. I call integrative diagnosis. Generally, the people who say they don't need supplements have really strong genetics. But to tell everybody else that they don't need supplements because their genetics is strong is missing the point. But often a person with strong genetics sometimes can't even understand why they'd eat well too, because they can handle a lot of stress from even diet. So the other thing, and the last thing that can be very helpful for longevity after a certain age are tonic herbs. So tonic herbs, there are many, many very good tonic herbs that were studied in China, in Chinese medicine. And because we have a short class here, I won't basically go through them all, but I think I have enough handouts to give you a few. So let me see. So I think we have 14 people here. I only can give it out if we have enough for everybody. Okay, so we have it, if you can pass it the back way there. If I pass it around that way. So here is one. This is licorice. Chinese licorice is different than Western licorice. It's an incredible tonic herb that can have lots of benefits for the body. And you could look at this and study this at home. There are some really good herbal suppliers on the internet that you can learn about for this one. And let's see, hopefully I have enough for this one. It kind of looks like I have enough. Hopefully, I'm just going to take a guess that I do. So this is also one that particularly is known to help. It's a tonic and longevity herb, which is called in Latin Dendrobrium. You'll be tested on this later. No, it's Chinese orchid, and it's made from the flowers and the stems of the orchid, and it's used. It has tremendous longevity tonic to replace lost energy. Lost energy in Chinese medicine is called Jing. So I'll give you one of those if you pass it around, please. And many other wonderful tonic herbs exist, and maybe in a future class I'll come here and give a class on the tonic herbs, or a class on any of these areas. We can talk about Qigong, we can talk about supplements needed for longevity. But what I like to do to finish up the last few minutes is open up to questions. So if you have any questions about what I talked about.
So some of the supplements may be lifelong.
Some, yes. So the statement is that some of the supplements may be lifelong. That's true. Some supplements can really help you your whole life because they can supply things that are missing. And also, as our nutrient absorption becomes less, as we get older, the metabolism drops, nutrient absorption becomes less. It's also helpful to know that all the scares about supplements have been found to be false. And there's reasons, I think, why that there's scares about supplements, because the correct use of supplements can help many, many diseases, but you can't patent them like medicines. So they're cheap, relatively cheap. So whenever any study comes out, if you look closely at the study, it found that it doesn't show that people have harm from the supplements. People don't have harm from the correct use of supplements. If you take a bottle of something, I think you might be in trouble. But otherwise, correct use doesn't do that.
Well, isn't there just as many side effects from regular drugs?
Well, the thing is that, there is, I think, if you look at, in America, there's like one death from supplements in 20 years, and someone took the whole bottle. That's the death. While from pharmaceutical drugs that are correctly given, it's almost close to 200,000 deaths a year. The correctly given, we're not talking about mistakes. We're talking about side effects because they were correctly given, but then people, had reactions to them. So I always find it funny that you have these supplement studies come out. Supplements are dangerous and harmful, and multivitamins, make you live less long. And then you look at it closely, and the study doesn't really show that. But nobody talks about all the pharmaceutical drugs. But we live in a commercial society for good and bad, commercially driven. So this is for commercial reasons. It's not about science.
Probiotic. Important or not?
Well, probiotic. The probiotic I recommend consistently is a probiotic called Biotics. And if anybody's interested, you can look at my website on this. Regular probiotics I don't recommend regularly. And the reason being is that this probiotic I recommend called Biotics is a soil-based bacteria. And the idea behind this is that when we are eating our own food, and we always got a little soil. And they found with experiments 40 years ago and then using with people that this soil-based bacteria is complementary to the bacteria in your colon. It helps the bacteria in your colon grow and prosper. And at first people will build up to taking quite a bit of it, and then maintenance is very small amounts. The probiotic is putting the bacteria in very high doses into your colon that it needs. And now, in the last few years, there's evidence from holistic practitioners and doctors that you can have an overgrowth of good bacteria in your small intestine where you're not supposed to have bacteria from probiotics. So I only recommend probiotics for short term. People who've taken antibiotics, I recommend they take a probiotic for a month or two. Or people who basically have very, signs I can see of really bad intestinal stagnation. I might recommend like a month or two of a good probiotic. And then after that, stop and promote the intestinal bacteria by things like carbohydrates. This intestinal area here, they have a name for that. I don't know where they come up with these names, but the biozome. So they call this the biozome, where you have intestinal bacteria living here. And someone wrote a funny article a few months ago saying, sorry, low carbers, your biozome is just not that into you. And what they meant by that is that carbohydrates promote healthy intestinal bacteria. So you have to eat a certain amount of carbohydrates to promote the bacteria. So eating carbohydrates in the form of starches, some natural sugars or fruits promote intestinal bacteria. Some fermented foods like miso and pickles also help that too. Okay, any other question?
You talked about iron. I looked at Anthony Culpo's website because he was mentioned in some of your blogs, and he seems to be very concerned about too much iron, even to the point of people getting transfusions or giving blood to get rid of iron. Is that an issue?
Well, there's a couple of things that basically, there are certain kinds of things that will get iron out of the body. And so some people will have a tendency to, for instance, heme iron from animal food is much more absorbable than vegetable iron. But a lot of people can't get enough iron from just vegetable sources. But the body doesn't really, some people hold on to iron in concentrated amounts and they need to get rid of some of it. And so in the past, I always recommended that people always soak their grains continually to get rid of something called phytic acid. But now my thinking is that the phytic acid could actually bind with some minerals, so that it's not a good idea to always soak your whole grains. You will need some of the phytic acid. So basically, to get rid of, if you sense that you might be gathering too much iron in your system, there's ways to get rid of it naturally. For instance, in someone who's eating a natural red meat, if you think that basically you tend to gather too much iron in your system, or you have a blood test that shows that, then basically have black tea or coffee with it. I think the main source of iron that's a problem is eating too many fortified grains. So going out and eating a lot of bread and bread products and noodles, because they put iron in it, although they put less iron than they do. In the past, you'll see like lower amounts of iron, but they still have quite a bit of iron. So you want to be careful of not eating out things like that have iron in them. And the other thing would be like cast iron pans would be something that you want to be careful of also. Okay, any other question?
How are the supplements made? For example, vitamin C,
So vitamin C is made, ascorbic acid is made from natural sugars. And it's been found, some people will promote the idea that you should only take natural supplements. But natural vitamin C can become hugely expensive and when you need much more of it. And it's been found that the vitamin C that's synthesized from sugars is just as effective as the whole foods one. The whole foods, the argument, I have books that argue for whole foods vitamin C, but a lot of it is made up. It's not made. Vitamin C in synthetic form has been used since the 1950s for healing, and it works. So it's very effective and much less expensive to use. Now, some people may choose as a maintenance. There's a company I recommend on my website called Innate Response that has good food-based vitamin C, and some people may choose to have a small amount of food-based C a few times a day, which could be fine too. If someone wants to just use the natural one in small amounts, you can get it from that company.
They changed the formula. I used to get multivitamins from them. Now it is in capsules. It doesn't have minerals. It tastes different.
They took the minerals out,
Not
so it's natural, but it is still natural. But they decided to take the minerals out of this supplement, their multivitamins, so that people didn't have to take as many of them. And some people didn't want to take as many of them, and some people didn't want the extra minerals, so you have to take a separate mineral supplement to get the minerals if you want the minerals. Okay, any last question? If not, then if you want some CDs, we have a few left here. And I had plenty of the Tonic Herbs, I'm glad. So we have a few CDs here. There's one available that's a double set for 10, the rest are 5. And if you are interested in seeing me, when I come here, I do consultations, I do acupressure, a form of energy treatment based on acupuncture, both without needles, finger pressure, fully clothed, but just with cotton clothing. And I also do energy exercise sessions. I teach people things. So if you're interested in that, just contact us for the next time. And thank you very much for coming tonight. Thank you.
Thank you.